Welcome to Midnight Terrors, where spine-chilling tales come to life. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications. You don't want to miss a single story that'll keep you up at night. We're on a mission to grow, and your support is everything. Share these terrifying stories with your friends, family, and anyone who dares to listen. Thanks for being part of the journey. Let's begin. Story number 1, The Final Feast. The snow fell thickly outside the stately Greystone Manor, cloaking the home in an ethereal white. The Richmond family had gathered for Christmas dinner, a cherished tradition steeped in decades of laughter, storytelling, and indulgence. Their grand estate, nestled in a snow-blanketed countryside, glowed with the warm hues of holiday cheer. The halls were decked with twinkling lights, garlands, and the unmistakable scent of pine from the 12-foot Christmas tree that stood sentinel in the living room. But this year, something was different. Instead of the usual chaos of preparing their feast together, the Richmonds had decided to outsource the cooking. It had been a stressful year, and the idea of someone else taking the reins of the kitchen seemed like the perfect way to relax. The chosen chef, a peculiar man named Alaric, came highly recommended through whispers at exclusive gatherings and glowing reviews from elite clients. His reputation for crafting meals that were as unforgettable as they were indulgent had intrigued Mrs. Richmond, who saw this as an opportunity to outshine past Christmases. When Alaric arrived, it was as though the temperature dropped a few degrees. He was tall and lean, with sharp, angular features that gave him a vaguely wolfish appearance. His dark eyes seemed to linger a moment too long on each member of the family, as if appraising them. He spoke little, his voice a low, measured tone that carried a faint, unplaceable accent. He moved through the house with the precision of someone who didn't just cook, he observed. Mrs. Richmond had greeted him warmly, though his silence and the peculiar way he smiled, a thin, tight-lipped curl, made her stomach flutter uneasily. But she pushed the feeling aside, reassuring herself that she had hired the best. "Make it unforgettable," she had joked nervously, as he unpacked his pristine knives and ingredients of mysterious origins. The rest of the family, engrossed in their own holiday excitement, paid little attention to Alaric. They laughed and mingled in the living room, sipping spiced cider and reminiscing about holidays past, blissfully unaware that their fate had already been sealed. From the kitchen, the faint strains of operatic music began to float through the house, a haunting melody that seemed strangely at odds with the festive mood. This was a Christmas dinner none of them would ever forget or survive. The family gathered around the long oak dining table at 6 p.m., the room aglow with golden candlelight. The table was a masterpiece: succulent roast turkey, glistening glazed ham, cranberry compote, roasted chestnuts, and an array of desserts that shimmered under the light. Everything was perfect. Alaric was nowhere to be seen. He had vanished into the kitchen, muttering about final touches with a cryptic smile. The Richmond family thought nothing of it. After all, this was supposed to be a luxurious treat, a break from the usual stress of holiday cooking. Dinner began jovially enough. Laughter rang through the grand dining room as the family raised their glasses to toast another year of togetherness. The clinking of crystal goblets and cheerful chatter filled the space, amplified by the soft glow of golden candlelight. But as the meal progressed, the atmosphere began to shift. It was subtle at first. Small frowns as the wine began to taste strangely bitter, the roast seasoning oddly metallic. Mr. Richmond, the patriarch, was the first to falter. His hearty laugh cut short as he doubled over, coughing violently. The sound was wet and sharp, like something inside him was tearing apart. His face flushed crimson, then deepened into a mottled, horrifying shade of purple. "Are you all right?" Mrs. Richmond gasped, reaching for him. But before her hand could steady his trembling shoulder, she froze, a guttural moan escaping her lips. Her elegant posture collapsed as she clutched her stomach in agony. Her skin, once glowing with life, drained of color. The first scream erupted from young Emma, who sat at the far end of the table. It was a piercing, blood-curdling cry as her limbs seized uncontrollably, her eyes rolling back into her skull. Her brother tried to reach for her, but his own hands spasmed violently, the veins on his arm bulging unnaturally as if something dark were coursing through him. One by one, the family began to fall. Convulsions racked their bodies, their joyous holiday cheer replaced by choking gasps, desperate pleas, and gurgling sounds that barely resembled human voices. Plates shattered as they hit the floor, and silverware clattered noisily, adding a chaotic symphony to the growing horror. Chairs toppled over as bodies thrashed, limbs jerking with unnatural force. The flickering candlelight seemed almost malevolent now, casting grotesque, distorted shadows on the walls. The room itself felt alive, the darkness at the edges creeping closer, as if it were swallowing the dying laughter and muffled screams. Above it all, faint strains of opera floated in from the kitchen, haunting, beautiful, and utterly detached from the nightmare unfolding just a room away. Somewhere beyond the chaos, Alaric hummed along to the melody, his voice calm and eerily content. The Richmonds' final moments played out like a macabre overture, their suffering a crescendo to the symphony that only he could hear. He stood still, unmoved, as he stirred a pot of simmering sauce. The haunting strains of an operatic aria filled the air, the soprano's voice soaring high and clear. It was Maria Callas, his favorite. Her voice masked the cries from the dining room, transforming the chaotic sound of dying into a grim symphony. The family died within minutes, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Hours later, the dining room was eerily quiet. Alaric emerged from the kitchen, his black gloves spotless, his crisp white apron unblemished. He surveyed the carnage with a clinical detachment, his lips curling into the faintest hint of a smile. On the table lay a single note, scrawled in crimson ink. "The taste of perfection requires sacrifice. Thank you for your contribution." Alaric moved methodically through the house, extinguishing the candles one by one, leaving the corpses bathed in the cold light of the full moon. As he prepared to leave, he paused by the phonograph, lifting the needle. Silence fell, oppressive and heavy, but before stepping out into the snowy night, Alaric turned back. "Merry Christmas," he murmured to no one in particular, his voice dripping with irony. Greystone Manor stood vacant for years after the incident. Neighbors whispered of the Richmond family's mysterious deaths. Some claimed it was food poisoning, others suspected foul play. But the police never found Alaric, and the case was quietly closed. Every Christmas Eve, locals say they hear opera music drifting from the empty house, and some swear they can see candlelight flickering in the dining room. The story became a warning. Be careful who you let into your home during the holidays. Not all gifts are meant to be opened. Quick pause. Help spread the word. A simple recommendation from you to a friend helps us reach more people and lets us keep creating content you love. Thanks for being part of this journey. Story number 2, The Crimson Gift. Evelyn Pierce lived in the grandest house in town, a sprawling Victorian estate adorned with holiday lights so brilliant they could be seen for miles. Every Christmas, the townsfolk admired her seemingly endless wealth, the parties, the lavish gifts for her employees, and her unmatched generosity to local charities. But what no one knew was the dark secret behind Evelyn's prosperity. On Christmas Eve each year, Evelyn performed a gruesome ritual, a ritual that demanded blood. This was no ordinary sacrifice, but an ancient pact she had stumbled upon decades ago while traveling through the Carpathian Mountains. To maintain her wealth and luxury, she had to offer up a soul on the holiest night of the year to the Crimson Saint, an entity as old as Christmas itself, bound not to goodwill but greed. Tonight, her ritual would be no different. Snow blanketed the quiet town, muffling the usual holiday cheer as Evelyn prepared the cellar for her annual sacrifice. The room was dimly lit by the flickering glow of black candles, their flames swaying as if they too feared what was about to unfold. The walls were adorned with runes etched in a mixture of ink and blood, the symbols pulsating faintly as if alive. The air was thick, heavy with the metallic tang of iron and the acrid sting of burnt offerings. In the center of the cellar lay a drifter, bound and gagged, his wide, terror-stricken eyes darting around the room. He struggled feebly against the ropes cutting into his wrists, the rough fibers stained with blood from earlier attempts to free himself. He was nobody to the world, a man who would not be missed. But to Evelyn, he was everything, the final piece of the ritual that ensured another year of wealth and fortune. Above, muffled Christmas carols drifted down, a cruel contrast to the grim scene below. Evelyn stood over him, draped in a crimson ceremonial robe that shimmered with dark patterns under the light of the candles. Her face was calm but stern, a mask of cold resolve, though a faint tremor in her hands betrayed her growing unease. The ceremonial dagger she held glinted wickedly, its blade engraved with runes matching those on the walls. She had sharpened it just hours earlier, ensuring it would cut cleanly through flesh and bone. The drifter let out a muffled wail as Evelyn raised the blade, his pleading eyes meeting hers. For a fleeting moment, her composure faltered. Was it worth it? She thought, her mind clouded by guilt. But just as quickly, she pushed the thought aside. She had come too far to stop now. The pact with the Crimson Saint demanded a soul, and if she didn't offer one, it would come for hers instead. "Forgive me," she whispered, her voice trembling. She gripped the dagger tightly, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her chest like a vice. The runes on the walls began to glow brighter, pulsing in anticipation as if the cellar itself were alive and hungry. The drifter thrashed harder, his screams muffled by the gag. Evelyn hesitated. This year felt different. The air seemed heavier, more oppressive, and the shadows in the room moved as though they were watching her. From the corner of her eye, she thought she saw the faint outline of a figure, but when she turned, there was nothing. Above her, the carols abruptly stopped. In their place came a low, guttural hum, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the house. The candles flickered wildly, casting monstrous shapes against the walls. The drifter froze, his eyes widening further in terror, and then Evelyn felt it. A presence. The Crimson Saint had arrived. "Do not waver," a voice hissed in her mind, ancient and rasping like wind through dry leaves. "The gift of wealth is not without its price. Offer the soul or suffer the cost." Evelyn's hand trembled as she raised the blade higher, but the voice grew louder, more insistent. "Now." The runes on the walls flared violently, bathing the room in an otherworldly red light. The drifter screamed behind his gag, and Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. She closed her eyes, raised the dagger, and plunged it downward. But as Evelyn raised the blade, a creak echoed from upstairs. Her heart froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. Setting down the dagger, she crept up the narrow staircase and peeked out into her grand foyer. It was Marie, her nosy next-door neighbor, standing there holding a plate of sugar cookies. Evelyn cursed under her breath. Marie had always been too curious for her own good. "I brought these over since I figured you'd be alone tonight," Marie chirped. "I saw your lights on and thought I'd pop by." Evelyn forced a smile, hiding her panic. "Oh, that's very kind of you, Marie, but I'm busy preparing for tomorrow's feast. Can we catch up later?" Marie tilted her head, noticing a smudge of red on Evelyn's wrist. "Oh dear, did you cut yourself?" she asked, inching forward. Evelyn quickly pulled her sleeve down. "Just a nick while cooking." But Marie's eyes wandered to the partially open cellar door. "Is that smoke? Are you burning something? It smells strange." Before Evelyn could stop her, Marie stepped toward the door. "Marie, wait," Evelyn snapped, her voice sharp and uncharacteristically panicked. But it was too late. Marie descended into the cellar, clutching her plate of cookies. Her cheerful expression quickly drained as she took in the horrifying sight below. The bloodied runes, the flickering black candles, and the gagged man writhing in terror. "Oh my God, Evelyn, what is this?" Evelyn's eyes darkened. She let out a long sigh, shutting the cellar door behind her and locking it with a resounding click. "Marie," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "I really didn't want you to see this." Marie backed away, nearly dropping her plate. "You're insane, Evelyn lunged, slamming Marie against the wall with startling force. "Do you know what I've sacrificed for this life? You have no idea what I've had to endure to keep it all. And now you've gone and ruined everything." Marie clawed at Evelyn, managing to knock her off balance. She scrambled toward the stairs, screaming for help, but Evelyn grabbed the ceremonial dagger and hurled it. It struck Marie in the leg, sending her tumbling to the floor. Marie gasped in pain, dragging herself up the steps. "Somebody help me!" But Evelyn was already upon her. "You were always too curious for your own good," Evelyn hissed, wrenching the dagger free. Blood seeped onto the stairs, staining the wood a deep crimson. As Evelyn prepared to deliver the killing blow, a voice echoed through the cellar, a guttural, rasping tone that made Evelyn freeze. "2 souls will do," it growled. "The Crimson Saint." Evelyn turned toward the pentagram where the drifter's body had gone limp. His head twisted unnaturally, his mouth agape as the voice spilled from his throat. The runes on the walls began to glow, casting an eerie, pulsing red light that made Evelyn's head swim. "No," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. "This wasn't the plan. You can't change the terms." But the voice only laughed. "You owe me a second soul, Evelyn, and she'll do nicely." Marie, still alive but bleeding profusely, looked up at Evelyn in horror. "What is it talking about?" she screamed. Evelyn hesitated, her hands trembling. If she didn't comply, the pact would be broken. She'd lose everything, her money, her home, her carefully curated life. Worse, the Crimson Saint would come for her instead. Tears streamed down her face as she gripped the dagger tighter. "I'm sorry, Marie," she choked out. "I didn't ask for this." "Evelyn, please, don't do this," Marie begged, trying to crawl away. But Evelyn brought the dagger down. As the blade pierced Marie's chest, the room erupted in an otherworldly glow. The Crimson Saint manifested in the pentagram, a towering, cloaked figure with hollow eyes that burned like embers. It let out a guttural laugh as the bodies of both sacrifices were consumed in flames, leaving behind only ash. Evelyn collapsed to her knees, the weight of what she'd done crushing her. But when the glow faded, the cellar was empty, spotless, as though nothing had happened. The drifter and Marie were gone. Upstairs, the clock struck midnight, and Evelyn heard the familiar ding of her bank account notification. Checking her phone with trembling hands, she saw the deposit, $10 million. The pact was renewed, but as she stared at the number, she felt no relief, just the ghostly whisper of Marie's dying plea echoing in her ears. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the house in an unbroken blanket of white, hiding the horrors within. And Evelyn knew that next Christmas, the Crimson Saint would demand more. Think you're brave enough? Then go ahead, choose the video on my right, or maybe the one on my left. But beware, these aren't just stories, they're nightmares that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Not everyone makes it through, so viewer discretion advised. Only the fearless will survive the terror waiting within.